Welcome back to another episode of Lindsey Byrd in Writing is Hard. This week's episode is on how to write a sapphic rom-com. How do you deal with characters who are lying? How do you make them likable? How do you manage that tension? And finally, what is the state of sapphic fiction in this day and age? All that and more. I hope you enjoy. Today's author interview is with Emily Zips. Zips grew up in Southern California, currently lives in New Mexico, and is a proud graduate of Mount Holyoke College. When she's not writing about queer women kissing each other, Zips can be found overanalyzing reality TV, talking too much about women's sport, and spending time with her wife and their dog, who looks like a coyote and acts like a cat. Her debut novel, Alice Rue Evades the Truth, is out on the 28th of October, 2025. Its backup book blurb reads, Alice Rue has never spoken to her longtime crush, Nolan Altman, but when she saves his life one night in their office building, the EMTs tell his family that Alice is Nolan's girlfriend. She wants to set the record straight, but Nolan's in a coma, and if the family feels comforted by the idea of Nolan having his girlfriend by his side for what might be his last moments, isn't it kinder to just go along with it, at least for now? After all, the Altmans are impossibly nice and supportive, and there's something about Nolan's sister Van that makes Alice feel more seen and understood than she has in years. The local news names her a hero, her boss finally starts treating her well, and Alice even starts to remember what it's like to have a family. She knows it's wrong to lie, but it's easy to convince herself that she's doing the right thing by evading the truth. What she can't avoid, however, is her growing chemistry with Van. Alice must decide if she can unravel this tangle of lies in order to salvage her chances with the woman who may just be the love of her life, especially if Nolan wakes up. Warm, witty, and full of heart, this debut rom-com is a love story for pessimists who secretly hope for their own happily ever after. So, just to get us started, the cover of this book is absolutely gorgeous. But one of the things that caught my eye like immediately, especially after reading the back of book blurb, was one little white lie equals one big hot mess. And that's like basically exactly what my thought was when I was first reading it.
Yeah.
When you're writing about a topic that's like this messy, how do you manage all of these moving pieces?
It was kind of wild. I will say that blurb line was harder to write than the rest of the book. We went back and forth on that line more than anything else. Like the edits on this book were actually quite light. But the back and forth on that little tagline, excessive. But I'm super happy with it. Um, in general, the book is like loosely based on kind of an homage to the 90s classic rom-com movie While You Were Sleeping, starring the incredible Sandra Bullock. And so that's always been one of my favorite movies. I loved it. And as I was thinking about what I wanted to write next, and I've written a number of books that didn't get published, and so as I was sort of deciding what to write next, I was thinking like what could be fun to gender swap and make queer. And that came to mind immediately because there is this love triangle. And in the movie, it's between two brothers. And so I was like, great, this is perfect. I can have it between two sisters. I'll change a bunch of stuff about the plot, but that'll sort of be central. And then I realized as I started writing it that like it's really not funny. Like it's really sad. But the movie is a comedy primarily because Sandra Bullock is so cute and she's so good at physical comedy. And so like the situations feel funny in a movie where if I wrote them like just straight from the movie, they would not be funny at all. Because you're in their head in a book in a way that you're not in the movie. And so it's like way less funny. And the movie's also like, I think like a quick 90 minutes. So you're really in and out. You don't linger in those moments. So it was a more meaty and messy premise than I had expected it to be going in, which I had so much fun with, but it sort of surprised me in terms of like how messy it actually got, especially in the middle.
Well, I can definitely see that. And I guess it brings to mind, like, so you knew when at the start you wanted to make a comedy, right?
Yeah, I knew it was going to be a rom-com for sure. So I knew it was going to feature a central romance, and I knew that I wanted it to be funny, but I also knew that I wanted what I sort of like to do in my projects and what I hope to eventually like be like a Zips book will be like emotionally kind of wrenching with a really earned romance at the end. So I knew like I was willing to make it wrenching, but a little more than I expected.
I guess that's exactly what I wanted to focus in on. Like, how do you balance the wrenching with the funny at the same time, with giving, you know, the room and space to experience all those emotions at the same time?
Yeah, I that's a great question. I think it's really the central question of this book and I think like everything that I want to write. Um, for me, I what works best for me is trying to put the humor in on the line level. So like in her inner thoughts. So this book is single POV. It's only from Alice's point of view. And so she has a like pretty irreverent, funny voice, even as all these really stressful things are happening to her. So for me, it's really about trying to put the humor on the line level, even while the situation is not funny. So, like, they're in a hospital room and they're like, wow, we don't know if this guy's ever going to wake up. And she's like, maybe I should moonwalk out of here. Like, I don't know. And so, just like thinking about like what's a sort of funny way that I could phrase this thought that in and of itself is not funny. I was really inspired by Casey McQuiston's One Last Stop, because in that book they do this incredible job of like the premise is also not funny. Um, it's like a really sad, lonely young woman meets someone like literally who's been stuck on the subway since 1970 in this like weird time travel situation, and then is like trying to get her off the subway. It's not a funny premise, but it is one of the funniest books. The voice is just so rich and complex, and it's so funny on the line level, and again you're just in the one character's head and that character is incredible, and so rich and so humorous. And so as I read that book I was like, yes, this is what I've been trying to find in myself. Like it sort of affirmed like this can work. So that was a big turning point for me in terms of figuring out that like you can have a deeply emotional scene, whether it's sad, whether it's romantic, whether it's guilty, which a lot of mine are, and still like keep the line level humor there. And so I really tried to carry that throughout the book, even when it gets sadder and more complicated and much messier. I tried to keep Alice's voice consistent was a way that I tried to like bring all the funny through.
One of the things that I think with humor is that it's kind of a break in tension. So if you have a lot of tension, you can use humor to, crack it and then
Yes.
lower the anxiety in the room. Because you have so many tense moments, was the humor helpful at certain moments where you'd be like, okay, this is getting way too much, time to bring it back? And then how did you also know when you should just leave the tension where it is because it needed to settle?
Yeah, I think that's it exactly. In the like big climactic moments, like those are not funny. Those are just feel it. And so I do think it's sort of like any time when Alice's inner monologue is like incredibly sincere and not funny, you can tell it's because like this is her at maximum feeling and like maximum overwhelm. And I think that for herself, the humor is a defense mechanism. She is like she's not outwardly. I don't know that any of the other characters would identify her as funny. I think Van would, but I don't think any of the others even like know that she's funny. She doesn't say a ton to them, which is so much fun about books, right? That you can just like be in their head. Um, but she has a pretty tragic backstory. She's a really sad person when we meet her at the start of the book, and so I think this sort of irreverent, funny inner life is her way of coping with her like pretty shitty life. And so then you sort of see her losing her coping mechanisms in the big moments because all of that kind of goes away.
That's quite natural too. I mean, like, I think for myself, I would never in my life consider myself a funny person. Like I'm just not. I can be funny if I'm writing stuff, which I feel like when you're like not faced with somebody, you can have those moments like I've thought of the
Yeah.
perfect joke.
Yes.
But in the moment, I don't think I could actually be like purposefully funny. And so I feel like a lot of people can relate to that, where like other people might not find you funny, but in your own head or in the privacy of your own space, that's when your humor can shine.
Yes, absolutely. For me, that's flirting. I can't flirt. I can write people flirting, but no, in real life, not happening.
It's very interesting. Like when you're writing something and you have that disconnect or you have the moment where you can like really sit and think, how do you sit down and go, this is funny, or this is good flirting, or this is a good joke? How do you bring that onto the page when you're not like that in real life?
I don't know. I for me, they just kind of come out of my fingers when I'm drafting. And I don't typically end up revising them. My first drafts are very clean. A lot of what's in the first draft ends up in the final, like on the line level. And so I just, they just sort of come out, they just kind of happen. And there are some that I have like really workshopped. There's one where Alice is she's like not a religious person, but she's like kind of trying to like pray for help in when she's I don't even remember what exactly is happening, but she's like, "Oh no, this is really bad. Like I'm about to be found out." And in the first draft, she said like, "Help me, lesbian Jesus." And then it I was like, "She's not a lesbian." So I was like, "Okay, help me, bisexual Jesus." And I was like, "That doesn't really have the same currency." So then I was like, help me, Queen Latifah. And then like that didn't work. And so it ended up in the book being like, help me, Olivia Benson um from SVU, which I stand by, but I did like write into my editor, like, girl, I have changed this 1,000 times. Here are all the things I've changed. Here's all the other things I've brainstormed. Like, I'm kind of happy with Olivia Benson right now, but like, I don't know. Like, what do you think? So that was kind of a rare one where I was like, I don't quite know how to stick the landing of this joke. But usually they just sort of flow out. There are a few times when people say funny things to me in real life, like funny stories or whatever, I write them down. I have a little uh, note in my phone of like things to put in a book. And so as I'm drafting, I'll like troll through that list and see if there's anything that's really good, especially in my sophomore novel. A lot of those have made it in. But in this book, um, an entire walk-in closet full of Halloween costumes exists and is something that like a friend of mine experienced and was like telling a story about it. And I was like, that's incredible. I'm taking that. I'm putting that in a book. Um, so and then also there were just like I remember I was talking to a friend about like how weird it was that we I don't know if you had this, but in the US in the 90s, they were like obsessed with the fact that children were going to be set on fire. And so we had like stop, drop, and roll drills, and everyone knew. Did you have them?
Yeah, I did. I distinctly remember multiple lessons about stop, drop, and
Yeah.
roll.
And it's like, I luckily have never been set on fire, but like stop, drop, and roll is such a like phrase.
Did they not
And
do
so I
that
was
anymore?
like,
Well, like, was it really just a 90s thing?
I don't know. I don't know children. All the children I know are very small, but I kind of hope they do, but I also hope they don't because I don't know that it was like the most relevant lesson for first graders. But so as we
Oh,
were talking about this, yeah, I have no idea. As I was talking about this with a friend, I was like, that's a phrase I'm going to find somewhere to put in this book. Like, I am going to have Alice say the phrase stop, drop, and roll at some point in this book. I don't care where it is. I'm going to figure it out because that's funny. So there were a few like that. But then the rest really just happened as they happened.
I have to admit, my millennial 90s kid experience of like the one phrase that has haunted me to adulthood is the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell.
Yeah.
Like
Yes.
that's the phrase that
100%.
like I remember most
It's
distinctly from my
like a
childhood experience.
sleeper cell activator for millennials.
Yeah, so it's just like, what is the mitochondria? It's like, I know this one.
Yeah. It's like,
And I have no like, and every millennial I know knows about the mitochondria.
yeah. And I can't name very many other parts of cells. You know, I'm not big into cell biology, I would say personally, but I do know that one for sure. So I
Which
can
one
put
is
myself out if
amazing.
I'm on fire. I can identify the powerhouse of the cell and like still struggle to do my taxes. Like, thank you, education, but what can you do?
That's the real humor of it.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So you said earlier that you made like a list to your editor of like these are the other examples you had. Did your editor give suggestions or offer different jokes or other things to replace here or there when things were struggling tonally?
Yeah, I love my editor. She is so wonderful. You always like read in the acknowledgments, people saying things like, thank you for seeing what the book was supposed to be and like helping me get there. And I was always like, I don't really know what that means. And then I worked with Katie and I was like, I do know what that means. She's amazing. So um she definitely would indicate like, I think this has slid out of the tone that you're looking for, or like, this reaction seems out of character. For Olivia Benson, she was like, I approve of Olivia Benson. It feels gay, even though it isn't explicitly gay. And I think that's exactly what we're going for here. And I was like, yes, okay, great. So that's why Olivia's in the final. Um, but in general, she like really let it be as funny as it is, and also as like tough and like emotionally difficult as it is. And so she was really helpful with helping me like walk that line. And so, pointing out like, here are the parts where you're off the line in either way. And so like, how can we move it back in? So she was incredibly, incredibly helpful with throughout the whole thing.
One of the things that really stands out to me about the back of book blurb and the way that you've talked about it so far is that there's a very odd love triangle in the sense that
Yeah.
one of the people is in a coma the entire time. He
Yeah.
has no involvement in this love triangle. So when you're
Hmm.
writing this love triangle, how do you make it feel real where the emotions are real without dipping too much into how silly it is?
Yeah. Yeah. It is such a funny love triangle. Yeah. So Nolan is in a coma for a lot of the book. No spoilers, but a lot of it. And so yeah, it's funny, like describing the book. It's like fake dating and love triangle, which by the way are two tropes that I I don't like. So oops. But it's like, is it fake dating if someone's just lying and the other person is in a coma? Like he has not consented to fake date anybody. He literally has a traumatic brain injury. And like, is it a love triangle? Or is it just like Alice and Van like each other and then Alice also has this like incredibly weird, untrue thing with Nolan? Um, so yeah, the balance of something I worked closely with my editor on, to loop back in the last two questions, was in the second half of the book when spoilers, Nolan wakes up. Like, what does that relationship look like? How love triangle is it? How invested is Alice in Nolan at that point? Like, how much is she like trying to get with him, and then which means then like stringing Van along? Like, essentially, how mean is Alice to both of them at that point? Something that was really important to me that I wanted to change in the movie. She convinces this coma guy that he does have amnesia when he doesn't, convinces him to like marry her. And they're like at the altar together at the end of the movie. And I was like, no, that's unforgivable in a book, because you're in her head. There's no cute Sandra Bullock face. There's no big chunky sweaters to like distract you from the horrible things that she's doing right now. Like, I knew that I wasn't going that far. And I didn't quite know how far I was going to go in terms of like, you spend the whole first half of the book watching Alice and Van fall in love, like over a comatose body of like a sort of triangulated third person. And then when that third person wakes up, like there's a real sort of betrayal of what Alice has been building with Van. And so the question for me creating it and working with my editor was like, how big of a betrayal are we going for? Like, how close can we get to the irredeemable line without crossing over? And like, what is the closeness of getting to that line going to do, not only to Alice and not only to Van, but also to Nolan, who is like also a person, when he's no longer just like a comatose body. And Alice's whole thing is that she doesn't know him. She's seen him. He said hi to her 4 times, hey 3 times, and how's it going 2 times. Like that is her relationship to Nolan over the course of 2 years. So she does not know him. She's never really talked to him. So for her, he's just like this body, like a prop. But for Van, that's her brother. For the whole family, like that's their person. He's the eldest child, he's the only boy, like all of these things. And so when he wakes up, Alice kind of realizes, like, oh, he's actually a whole person. And he both like has agency and also like, I don't like most people. Like, do I like him? Like, I don't know. I've never met him before. Like, what does it mean to be in love with someone you've never met and then suddenly meet them? Like, what does that look like, feel like? How does that work? Does that work? And so, like, really trying to claw very close to the line of like how far is too far with Nolan and how close is too close with Van. And trying to balance all of that was really the game of the second half of the book.
Well, it's really interesting, and I'm glad you brought it up because I think for me, that's where I would struggle the most with the dynamic, where it's like, here's somebody who's actively lying, who's misleading everybody, and then continually doing it. It's not just one lie, oh, I'm the girlfriend, and then you disappear out the back door. No, it's continually day after day after day. And so, like,
Yeah.
that's for some people, that type of betrayal is really difficult to get over. When you're dealing with those types of dynamics, how do you, without giving spoilers, if this is possible, feel free to say you can't explain it, but how do you look into, it's like, okay, this is a forgivable act, or this is a type of person who would forgive that act? And then also, what type of redemption, if redemption is on the table, would somebody need to do in order to overcome that type of betrayal?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And this was like this central question as I especially began drafting the book. First of all, Alice would like to say she never actually lied. She just evaded the truth. The original title of the manuscript was, she had a different last name. It was Alice Higginplatz and the Enormous Lie She Technically Never Told. So a lot of the book and actually a lot of the humor is her trying to find ways to not say it while making people think she said it. So they'll be like, and she does try in the first chapter very hard. She says, I'm not his girlfriend. Like she tries very hard to come clean and it doesn't stick. And then she's like, okay. But so then, they'll be like, oh, are you his girlfriend? And she'll be like, exactly. And they all take that to mean it's like a situation ship. And she means I've never spoken to him and he doesn't recognize me. But like, whatever. Or, like, oh, Alice, like, do you have a key to his condo? And she's like, no, we didn't get to that step yet because like we don't know each other. And so like she's constantly trying to find these ways to like not actually lie, which she admits to herself is not going to help really, but it helps her be able to keep doing it. So, she would just like to set the record straight that she is evading the truth, not lying, which she's not, but that's how she feels. In general, for me, a lot of this question of like how to make a character, I did not want her to be an unlikable narrator. I wanted her to be likable. I wanted you to love her and root for her and be like, girl, what are you doing? But I wanted you to love her. And so that's a really hard line. A lot of it for me is in the setup. So in chapter 1, she saves his life. She gives him CPR until the paramedics come. Who knows if that saves his life? And then the paramedic tells the nurse who, there's like a game of telephone and the family believes that she's his girlfriend. They come to her workplace. They're like, oh my God, you saved our son. Come back with us to the hospital. You're a boyfriend. And she's like, oh, he's not my boyfriend. Like, I'm not his girlfriend. And they're just like, yeah, yeah, yeah. Young people don't use labels. It's fine. And she's like, ooh, that's like super not what I meant. Um, and then they're just like, he's never had a girlfriend before. He's never had someone there for him. You being there for him, like the last thing he saw being the face of someone he loved is the only thing that's giving us comfort right now. And so she's like, it's kind of worse to tell them the truth. Like I honestly, like, she honestly believes in that moment that the best thing she can do for these strangers is say okay. And then she just keeps saying okay. And so for me, the setup was really important to like justifying the lie. And so I had, after I wrote maybe like 5 chapters, I had people read it, some beta readers that I really trusted. And my primary question to them was like, does this make sense? I don't want this to be a misunderstanding trope. Like, I want this to feel like this is a fleshed out decision that you understand why she made it. And maybe you wouldn't have made the right one, but you don't hate her. And so I sent that to like, I don't know, 8, 10 people that I trusted. And all of them came back with like, yes, you can keep going with this. This is working. She's kind of dumb, but like, you have created a situation such that this was kind of the right thing for her to do originally. Um, and then the really big moments in the first act, one of the really big moments is when she has her first opportunity to bail. She's like kind of invited to bail, and she doesn't because she has feelings for Van. And that's sort of a turning point for her because she's telling herself through the whole first, whatever, like 20%, like, I'm doing this for them. This is for them. This is for the family. It's not about me. I'm getting all these benefits because I'm like, have no family and I'm lonely and I hate everything about my life. And this is so lovely. But like, it's for them. Aren't I a nice person for doing it for them? And then at that moment, she's like, like, I'm admitting to myself that I'm doing this partially for me because I unfortunately have a crush on this guy's sister, which is, a whole other situation. But so for me, it was really about how can I put her in this situation in a way that feels like kind of what a good person would do. And that also then makes it so much harder for her to get out of it because she's told herself this is what a good person would do. So figuring out how to really justify it for her so that the reader would understand and like be on board was absolutely the challenge of the first, you know, 8-ish chapters.
I don't like that, to be honest, because like as a recovering people pleaser,
Oh my God, yes.
I
Ooh, I'm
absolutely
not in
relate.
recovery yet, but I'm eyeing it.
But yeah, it's just like absolutely, it's like, oh, this is gonna make your life so much harder. I'm just gonna, sit over here and do whatever you need, just, disappear. Like, I feel like that's so relatable, where it's just like you do whatever you need to do for the other person, and yeah, it absolutely sucks, but like if that's what you gotta do to make everybody happy, like I can really get that. And like honestly, it feels so realistic, and I feel like it's something a lot of people could relate to.
Yeah, that's my hope.
Now, one of the things that I really did like about the book choice that you made, because you mentioned earlier that you based it off of a movie, but you made it sapphic. What was interesting to you about making this particular relationship sapphic and really exploring the relationship between her and Van and having that be a sapphic rom-com?
Great question. I only write sapphic rom-coms. So for me, I was like, well, this is obviously the direction that it's going. It's funny in the pitch, like Nolan is so much in the pitch. And so I keep having in the marketing materials to be like, it's sapphic. I didn't want anyone to be surprised. Um, I really enjoyed the like, if you think about this sort of premise in which there's like this golden child and then these other children, and the other children are sort of like overlooked, which is the premise in the movie that the coma guy is like rich and fancy, and the other kids are like normals. Um, I wanted to play with that, but having so it's like Van and Nolan are close in age, and then there's a younger sister who's much younger. She's a freshman in college, and Van and Nolan are in their mid 30s. And so for Van and Nolan in particular, in order to create like distance between them personality wise, it was so fun to get to play with Van being queer, and not just queer, but also butch. So there's a lot in her story and in this weight of her like being with the family and trying to like sort of lead the family through this as like she's Van is steady. She is stable, she is calm, she is like a bulwark. She is your rock in the storm. And so to be that for her family, when her family is like they're quietly homophobic, I would say her parents. They're like they've not cut her out. She's still in their life, but like they don't talk about it. And they'll like call her girlfriends her friend. Like, how's your friend Sarah? Yeah, exactly. And so adding that dynamic was so compelling and meaty of like not only is Van lusting after her brother's girlfriend, but that means so much more when Van is a woman than if Van was a man. Like this is speaking to the family dynamics that have been happening since like the first time she refused to put on a dress when she was a little kid. You know, like all of these things are stacking together such that this like fragile piece in this family with Nolan being like a huge dick and Van being gay and like the parents sort of refusing to see either of those things. And then all of them coming to a head because Alice has essentially put them in the same category and then is weighing them against each other. Um, so the queerness, the butchness, the homophobia, the like they look a lot alike, but they're like incredibly different and like they're both wearing men's clothes, but they're wearing really different men's clothes. Like, what does that mean? What does that look like? The parents like really want Alice and Nolan to have kids. And Alice is like, oh, this is because you think Van's not going to have kids because she's queer. So, like, you think this is your only chance to have kids. Like, it's really meaty and it's really messy. And I think that's delightful. I had so much fun with that. Van is like, I love her. She's really swoony. She's like a dreamboat love interest. And so I had such a good time with her. And I do think those contrasts and especially the push pull within the family is so much more interesting with her being a queer sister than being a straight brother.
I have to admit, I'm falling a little in love with her just listening to you talk about
I
her.
know, right? And she has a really big dog. And I feel like that just adds to the appeal. He is like a main character. So
What type of dog
that's
is it?
important. He is an extremely large white floppy situation. He is ripped 100% off from my friend's dog. So I am planning to do some like, ask me anything and I'll try to answer it while this dog steps on top of me with my friend's dog. So all of the dog's name is Frank in the book. All of Frank's mannerisms and his physicality and his personality are just, I did not make them up. They are, sorry, I plagiarized them from a real dog.
You didn't
Whose
plagiarize,
name
you
is
took
Bowie.
inspiration.
I was inspired without changing a single factor from my friend's dog. So, and like Alice loves that. And like, just like, sometimes like watching Van scratch the dog, it's like Alice is like, what if those hands were on me? Like it does add a nice little like romance pining situation. And Nolan, no pets.
Rude.
I know.
That's a red flag. Just gonna
Huge,
say.
huge. There's a lot of red flags, but like that is one of them.
No, I think something else that you touched on is, or at least that I was getting while you were discussing it, was the gender dynamic. First son, paragon of the family, younger sister, but also the oldest sister. Older sisters
Yes.
tend to have, a certain set of responsibilities thrust upon them, familial obligations, which is now
Yeah.
people get weird about older sisters who are butch and decide that
Yes.
they're, and so there's the exploration of that gender dynamic, I think is also something that's really interesting to follow as well.
Yeah, it was so fun. There's a scene that I is really fun for me where Alice is in like the family home for the first time for Hanukkah. And she sees a picture. There's like a picture wall in the hallway, and there's a picture of little Van as a cheerleader. She's like 6 or 7 in the picture. She's wearing like sparkly like bows and whatever, and clearly this like little girl cheerleading camp. And she's like scowling and crying in the photo. And Alice is like, wait a minute, like I'm obsessed with this. We cannot keep walking down this hallway. Like we have to stop and look at this. It's inspired by a picture of one of my baby cousins who now horrifyingly is in high school, but when he was like 4, he took soccer. And there's one, he went one time, and there's one picture of him. He's like posing with like his foot on the ball. And he's just crying, and he has like a sweatband. It's the best thing I've ever seen in my life. So I was like, how do I capture that energy? Um, but so Alice is like, this is the funniest thing I've ever seen in my life. And Dan was like, yeah, like my mom put me in this cheerleading camp, and then they told me never to come back. Like she got kicked out of cheerleading camp because she was so miserable. And then they go upstairs to this closet full of Halloween costumes. And Van is like, I used to sneak up here and try on the suits that live in this Halloween costume closet because like it was the only time she had access to masculine clothing. And so like that sort of like dichotomy, just like within the house of like downstairs in her parents' expectations, like cheerleader Van, upstairs on her own, she's like putting on these like crusty old Halloween suits just to, like see what it feels like. Um,
And quite
was like
literally
a
in the
really
closet.
literally inside a closet. Like it does not get more clear than that.
We are
And so yeah,
hitting the
there's
nail on the head.
yeah, and so there's a lot of little things like that, and Van's a physical therapist, and so she knows a lot more about like traumatic brain injury and what's happening to Nolan than the rest of the family. So there's so much weight of responsibility on her, and also like she's the one family member that's not seen very clearly by the rest of her family, but Alice sees her immediately, and Alice is like, she's known she's bi forever. Like she sees Van and it's like, oh, I'm into that. Like this is working for me. It is like lust at first sight for Alice, no question. And so Alice sees her really clearly. And that's like the basis of their relationship is that the two of them are really the only people understanding what's happening, even though Alice is lying to Van. So the layers of that are really fun, but I do think they're deeper because of the gender stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, like, when you're describing that photo on the wall, there's something like almost insidious about the idea that you put a picture of your crying child on the wall for everyone to see. It's like, why that photo?
Yes.
Like, you could have chosen any other photo, but the one of your child crying is the one you want immortalized for everyone.
Yeah, and like you like it's funny and like it's a funny picture to put up on the wall, but it's less funny when you know that like her butchness is a conflict that she's having with her family. Like that's complicated. Um and so yeah, it's like this sort of hilarious moment and it ends up being like oddly romantic. um but they're like standing really close together while they're talking about it. Um and in a slow burn, standing close together is like essentially third base. Um, and but it is like there's a lot to read into everything that happens in this family dynamic.
When we were preparing for this interview, you mentioned that you were really interested in like the current landscape of sapphic books. What is your impression of it now, and where would you like to see it go?
Um, it's so good right now. I think that like, 5 years ago, maybe like 10 years ago, it was so hard to find any published sapphic books. People were like really going to fanfic to try to find anything sapphic.
And that's
And
rough. The fanfic world for sapphics is not very easy either.
yeah, like there's some really great stuff and there's a lot of not existing. And so then, people really started like picking up with self-publishing. And then there started being a few like really small presses that only did like lesbian or sapphic stuff, but it was still pretty hard to find, especially something that didn't necessarily like feel like fanfic. And then now there's this like gorgeous explosion, like Big Five, Trad Pub, sapphic romances and rom-coms. Like I can't read them all. There's too many to read, and that is just such an exceptional position to be in. And there's folks that exclusively write sapphic. There's folks that write all kinds of pairings, including sapphic. And I think it's just like I would not have gotten a book deal if those deals hadn't happened. If those books hadn't been successful. We sent out I had 3 books die on submission before Alice got picked up, and all were sapphic. And the first one went out in 2020. And like that book wasn't ready. Like that's fair. It was right that it wasn't picked up. But I also think if that book went out now, it might get picked up with like a lot of developmental edits. Um, because the landscape is so much richer, and I think people are more willing to take risks on sapphic books than they were before. I also think sapphic books are there are fewer of them and they get less marketing and less readership than any other queer pairing. So I think it's still like bottom of the barrel in terms of like cis queer books. Um, there's I remember again when Casey McQuiston came out with One Last Stop, it was right after Red, White, and Royal Blue, which is a pairing of two men. And I remember there were all these readers being like, ugh, I don't want to read. Like, I was so excited for their next book, but like, I don't want to read this because it's sapphic. And I was like, well, I want to read it more. Um, but I do think there is it's a smaller community that will read them, but there are so many really, really successful sapphic rom-coms, the like Delilah Green trilogy, Alison Cochrane books, Amy Spalding's books. Like there are so many that are really sort of exploding. Alyssa Cole has really great sapphic ones. And so it's just so wonderful. I feel like it's really um it's a great moment to be in it. And I'm really excited to be joining this group. Not that they know me, but
One
to be
day.
like entering, yeah, hell yeah, to be like entering this community that I know was like these spots were like scraped out and carved out, and so then to be able to just sort of walk in is really it's super exciting.
No, I definitely think you're right. And it's something I've noticed in general where I'm more familiar with the fan fiction background. And from my understanding of fan fiction communities, a lot of people are perfectly happy seeing male-male romances, mainly because those are the main actors on the stage. Most stories don't have more than two women in the scene at the same time
Yeah,
anyway. But as soon as you introduce more than one woman, suddenly they're like, oh, that's little Mary Sue. I don't like that. And then as soon as you try to
yes,
have two women at the same time, now it's like, wow, you are drowning us in women. It's like, no, we've just had,
yeah.
there's two of them. And then once you put their romance
Stop
in,
forcing it down our throats. Like,
yeah,
okay.
exactly. And so I know for fan fiction, I feel like there are a couple of communities like Once Upon a Time had a pretty good sapphic fan fiction community. Um,
Humongo, yeah.
yeah, but beyond that, it was always like the men were the main ship, and then you were lucky if you got to see the women show up.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, massively so. Yeah. And like I've written a lot of fanfic, like been there, all sapphic. And so like in my like little tiny circles, it was like everyone liked it. Maybe this is all it is. And then when I would like take off my filters, I'd be like, wow, this is not really what's happening in the rest of the world. Um, yeah, I think that in general, people of most sexual and gender orientations will read straight books. I think that people of many sexual and gender orientations will read gay men pairings. And I think primarily sapphic books are read honestly by sapphic people.
Yeah.
And so that's like, you're just looking at a much smaller user base. And I think that's changing. I think there are more people of other orientations who are like, actually, these are very good books. But I do think there are a good number of romance readers who are women who like men. And so their object when they read the romance is the man. Like that's who they're attracted to, that's who they have the feelings about. So I understand being like, well, the person I like is not here, which is kind of how I feel about books where there either are not women or the women don't feel to me like women. I'm like, I'm not super interested in that. So I don't say that like it's a bad thing. Like, I think that's legit. Read the books you want to read. Like, I don't
Yeah.
care. Um, but I do think like at least try it and see if you like it. Um, I think that more people would like sapphic books than know that they would like sapphic books. So I do hope that the continued exposure is gonna eat away at that some of that.
Yeah, I think it's a good opportunity for people who perhaps they're not queer, they're not interested, they're, whatever the thing is, I think it's a good opportunity for them to empathize with people who do feel a certain way or just see certain dynamics that maybe they've never spent much time with a butch woman. Maybe they've never spent much time looking at what that type of dynamic is, but maybe they have a colleague and it's like, oh, this is something that might be interesting to them. And now I know something that might make them feel good at the end of the day. Not in a sexual way, but like just in general, like understanding more about somebody, about their interests, about things that are important and meaningful to them just makes the whole community more empathetic in general.
Absolutely, 100%. Yeah.
And I just want to say thank you so much for joining us. It was really lovely to talk to you.
Well, thank you for having me, Lindsay. I'm so happy to be here. I'm so excited that you're doing this project. I think it's awesome. I've watched some of your other interviews and I think you're doing amazing. So I'm very excited to have been here.
Thank you so much. And we'll see you next time. Thank you for joining us for this week's episode of Lindsey Byrd in Writing is Hard. Emily Zipps's book, Alice Rue Evades the Truth, is out on the 28th of October, 2025. You can find out where to find it and more on her in the description. If you enjoyed this content, please do like, share, and subscribe so we can continue to bring you more. Bye for now.